Today I wanted to talk a little bit about the rich lineage of the Nintendo Game Boy. We're going to be talking about these handheld consoles, pretty much so from the original Nintendo Game Boy up until the Game Boy Advance SP. We're going to cut it off at the Nintendo DS stuff and maybe pick up another video on that later. It all began with the original Nintendo Game Boy. I'm sure a lot of you have had these. It's quite heavy, and it's a big brick, but let me tell you, when this first came out, this was light years ahead of the time. A lot of us had Tiger Electronic games. I remember getting those for my birthday. This is what I really wanted, though, but it was just out of the price of a lot of families. But probably around the year 1990, 91 or so, I think I finally got my first Game Boy. Man, was I excited. These Game Boys take cartridges that go into the back. Each game is held on its own cartridge, so unlike those Tiger ones, you could actually get different games, pop them in. This runs on 4 AA batteries, so you get a couple hours of gameplay out of these. I know I was always bothering my mom to get me some new batteries constantly, it seemed like. You have a power switch here. Kirby's Dream Land 2 is the game we got fired up in there right now. A lot of people say it's in black and white. It's actually like several shades of green. So by today's standards, it's pretty outdated. But again, at the time, this was the bee's knees. Shortly thereafter, there's a Game Boy Pocket that got released. This is a much lighter, much more thin, streamlined handheld. It takes the same Game Boy cartridge, just like the original Game Boy. Here we got Dr. Mario. Takes AAA batteries. As you can see, the screen is slightly larger on the Game Boy Pocket versus the original Game Boy. At first glance, it may not look like it, but it is slightly bigger. The big advantage of the Pocket, though, is it's so much smaller. Let's fire this one up. Here we got Dr. Mario on here. So you can see that the shading on this screen is a little bit different than the original Game Boy. This one is going to be kind of closer to a black and white screen, believe it or not, whereas the original one was more of like shades of green. This was a big step in the right direction for Nintendo. This does have what they consider to be a contrast on the side. It basically, operating it slowly, it just darkens or lightens the screen depending on what kind of ambient light you have. I should mention that neither of these are backlit or even frontlit, so the only way you could really play these was by sitting underneath like a table lamp or by a window during the daytime. After the Game Boy Pocket, we stepped it up big time to the Game Boy Color. This actually had games that were released specific to the Game Boy Color, so these actually were getting, just like the name implies, some color involved. These games will not work in the Game Boy Pocket or the original Game Boy. However, the original Game Boy games will be played in the Game Boy Color. Graphically, it's a pretty big step in the right direction. So this game was released around the year 2000. Quite a big improvement over the first 2 Game Boys, as you can see. Still, this does not have a frontlit or a backlit screen, however. The frontlit and backlit screen was going to come a couple years later once we got into the next generation of the Game Boys. Here we have a Game Boy Advance. This one's in a really cool purple color. We also have one, I believe this one's called Glacier. It's basically like a transparent type of plastic. They changed going from a vertical arrangement to a horizontal arrangement, as you can see here, compared to the older Game Boys. These newer ones were an upgrade in pretty much so every way. These are still not front lit or backlit though, so you still gotta be able to play in the right setting. These run on 2 AA size batteries. These have their own series of games known as Game Boy Advance games. Graphics, the sound, everything got a massive bump compared to the Game Boy Color. So a lot of people say that playing a Game Boy Advance graphically, you have about the power of a Super Nintendo in your hands. I would agree with that, maybe even slightly better than a Super Nintendo, to be honest. So this screen does have some scratches in it. I'm planning on doing some refurbishing to this particular unit. There is a volume control here on the bottom. You can plug your headphones in. You have shoulder buttons, L and R. Power is right there. These take removable cartridges, just like the old Game Boys. The cartridges themselves are much smaller, as you can see. They fit a lot more data on these. Really cool system. These are starting to make a comeback in the retro community, with companies doing like full-on custom jobs, actually is the best way to put it. Revised it a little bit later and called it a Game Boy Advance SP. Here we got 4 different versions of the Game Boy Advance SP. They had all sorts of different colorations of these over the years. You could have an entire collection just based on Game Boy Advance SPs. Really, if you want to play Game Boy games, in my opinion, this is the way to do it. The first iteration of it was called a Game Boy Advance SP, and if you look at the back of it, up here, under the model, it will say AGS-101. They made several different colors, but if it says AGS-101, it really is just saying that you have a front-lit screen. So when these originally came out, I mean, these just really blew me away. Graphics, sound, amazing on this. It has a very good quality screen. If you press this button in the center here, it'll actually dim the screen. If you press it again, it lights the screen up. Like I was saying, this version of the Game Boy Advance SP-001 has a front-lit screen. It's a massive improvement over the older lineage of the Game Boys. At this point, you could actually play this in complete darkness and be able to see the screen. The next revision of it, though, is the Game Boy Advance SP-101. So we have one in blue and one in pink. So if we turn that on, and I'll turn on the 001 side by side. So here we have a 001 and a 101. Don't necessarily worry about what game you have here so much on screen, as much as how bright it is. Both settings on the dim, both on bright. You can see how the 101 has a much brighter screen. If you were to play Game Boy Advance games, in my opinion, this is really the one that you want to try to find. Sometimes you can find them on eBay, you can find them in local game stores. You just want to look on the back, right here at the label, AGS-101. They have an absolutely beautiful screen. This one we picked up a few months ago. Battery worked, the battery was totally dead. There was some dust behind the screen, so we just got it, cleaned it all up. One other way that you guys and girls can actually play Game Boy games is on your GameCube. So here we have what they refer to as a Game Boy Player. The concept of this originally came out on the Super NES. I don't have one of those to show you. That's just something that's forthcoming to the collection, hopefully. But the GameCube Game Boy Player is actually where it's at, because this will play Game Boy games, Game Boy Color games, and Game Boy Advance games. This is what the unit itself looks like. This actually screws onto the bottom of your GameCube, which I have one over here. I can show you what it looks like once it's screwed onto the bottom of the GameCube. It's this section right here at the very bottom. That's the Game Boy Player. Unfortunately, over the years, these Game Boy Players have lost most of their boot up discs. So this is the expensive part. This one actually still has the instruction booklet, as you can see. So this is the software that allows the hardware to read the Game Boy game. Give me a moment. We're going to fire this up and I'll show you what that looks like. So make sure you got your Game Boy Player disc. This is a boot up disc. This has to go into the GameCube. Make sure you have your Game Boy Player attached onto the bottom. One weird thing is that when you put your cartridge in, it actually goes face down. At that point, you should be able to fire it up. It goes into the GameCube boot up menu here. How cool is that? So here we got Castlevania Circle of Moon. One other neat thing I should mention is that you can still play these Castlevania games now that were intended to be played on a Game Boy with a wireless Wavebird controller, just to add to the cool factor. So this is just one more excellent, cool way to be able to play your Game Boy and Game Boy Advance games. This will play Game Boy Color, Game Boy, and Game Boy Advance. I recommend trying to pick one of these up soon if you don't have it, because the prices seem to be going up really fast on these. So there you have it, a little bit of history on the Nintendo Game Boy. Hopefully you enjoyed this showcase of what we have here. By no means do we have every model. You could make an entire video game collection based off of the Nintendo Game Boy alone. I don't think it gets nearly the amount of love that it should. If you guys can come across one for a good price, pick them up, add it to your collection. I bet you'll have hours of fun with it. As always, thanks for watching Horseplay Hobbies. Stay tuned for more good content.